President Kavanaugh, thank you very much. Ken, Nancy, thank you for persuading me to come here. It's been really an unbelievable day of hooky for me. It was very beautiful, and it matched the quality of what I saw. This is really an exceptionally beautiful and interesting town. Cities have been very much the central part of my life, and I was ashamed that I had not been here before. And it's very, very rare to find something this good, this well preserved, and with this many interesting people who are concerned about it. I want to try to, we'll talk more specifically about Pensacola, but I'm always leery of horseback. You know, one-day horseback estimates of things. I know nothing about Pensacola, but my eyes tell me a lot. I can go to most cities and understand them pretty well, pretty quickly. You've got one. Hang on to it dearly. It's worth everything. And the most important thing, you've got the city itself. It's not a university or an institution or a nice waterfront or some wonderful residential. You've got a heart of town in which people live, in which there are beautiful buildings, in which you like walking around in. The test of all towns is, if you're in a car, do you want to stop and get out? If you do, you're in the right place. Highway world has not destroyed you, and in fact, you have the things that literally take 100 years to produce. You have incredible landscaping, and you have a vocabulary in place with a cultural gene bank behind it, which makes you know this is a place that is not in Nebraska. We'll say a little bit more about this. I want to try to cover three things tonight. One, an assessment of what kind of physical setting we've created for ourselves since World War II, what I call the Second America. Two, a restatement, boring as it may be, about why towns and countrysides are so important to us and so important to one another. Towns and countrysides are inextricably interconnected. And three, I'm going to talk about some reasonably simple requirements for attempting to offer alternate futures for American urbanism, and you'll understand what the alternative is that we're trying to get, and show you some examples of things that I think underscore that. Bear with me just for a few minutes. In the half century since World War II, a period which is likely to be remembered, if we're lucky, as the American Empire, this country has built a second America, as much as in the previous 400 years. The biggest, fastest, most continuous building boom in history, whose physical characteristics and side effects we're only now beginning to understand and evaluate. What have we been up to in that 50 years? From the air, a view, Ken showed me some beautiful aerial views today, and all of us in this country grew up with air travel, so the world from the air, for me, from the very beginning, has been the way in which I understood the world, and it was an enormous advantage. From the air, the most obvious aspect of all of this building activity has been the filling up of open space in and around most of the older towns and cities. This is particularly visible at night along much of our coastline and around our inland cities, which appear as continuous carpets of light. While we still have an enormous amount of empty land, particularly compared to Europe, Japan, or the Asian subcontinent, the dark areas of the continent are harder to find from the night sky. In daylight, it is the differences in pattern, density, and scale that jumps up at you. The random, helter-skelter, less dense appearance of new built areas is in stark contrast to either the open but highly ordered patterns of diminishing agricultural land or the dense regularities of our older cities. These new growth patterns, like the web of a disoriented spider, is not only unfamiliar but vaguely disturbing in the randomness of its disorder and the proficiency of its consumption of land. The Earth from the Air, or The Earth from Above, which was the title of a book that all of us grew up with, which had fabulous aerial views of Europe and where we learned about European towns. The Earth from above is not what it used to be. And one begins to suspect one is looking down on some form of aberrant, if not yet cancerous growth. Some years ago, the New York Times, in their science section, ran a series of photographs of spider webs. And the spiders had been given caffeine, cocaine, nicotine, various, some about sort of supportive substances. And then their webs were photographed. The most aberrant webs were, in fact, those brought on by caffeine, of which I drink a lot. Nonetheless, as soon as I saw those webs, I said, my God, they've lost the language, the ability to build in ways that are natural and rational to them, which is exactly what we've done. But what about on the ground? What's it like driving out there on the edge of the Strip through the vast ring-around-the-collar areas of low-density sprawl, our new world of convenient shopping and subdivisions which now blanket whole counties? If there is any trace left of my once lovely Northern Virginia at Tyson's Corner, it's hard to find. A first and most obvious recognition is that since 1950 we have achieved what no culture in history has before. We have found a way to eliminate simultaneously and completely both town and country, have created whole areas from Florida to California where neither edge nor center exists any longer. Areas which are not only stunningly ugly and bleak, but also confusing to navigate, inefficient, wasteful, as well as costly to service, police, and maintain. We have been hard at work for the last 50 years of making a mess of the continent that we had been given and leaving a detritus of essentially throwaway pieces and places, badly planned, badly designed, badly built, which are now our culture's new millennial home. These areas, because of their latent inefficiency of layout and the low quality of their construction and infrastructure, are suitable neither for preservation or adaptive reuse, and will in the short time become devalued areas of increasing blight into which we will decant our poor. Alas, these places will be very politically difficult to clear, yet they surround downtowns and separate these from the higher-end outlying residential areas and countrysides, out beyond the reach of SUVs. All of this is a non-urban legacy of the Second America, which I suspect now to be decidedly also second-hand. Sounds good, huh? It's real. It's everywhere. One is tempted to ask whether or not this is what we intended. Had we, the people who planned and won World War II, lost the peace at home so quickly? I remember that the P-51 was a beautiful high-performance fighter plane. But what happened to the thinking behind the design of the road to the airport in post-war years? We have lost it in an area that is in fact too close to home. It indeed is our communal home. An attempt to rationalize this new growth, an attempt to rationalize this piecemeal growth, which really had to do with very rapid private sector land assembly, which had very little benefit from any previous models, has left us with lots of parcels and pieces, but few sensible instructions about how they should go together. As if we couldn't imagine a larger, more simple, more attractive order of things. As if we'd forgotten our own urban history and had, as a result of the post-war binge we went on, a amnesia hangover. The models and plans and development ideas that are now being restudied and that the public has become interested in somehow got lost for almost half a century. This is the residue of that post-war binge, what we see around us almost anywhere, and it is what we now have to deal with. We have begun recently, only recently, to imagine much more sensible growth policies for our national home. And that's enormously good, and there are many more people who now know more about it. Initially, towns came into being because they provided safety and shelter as well as places of exchange for goods and services for a variety of people. Very few of them had the luxury of being elaborately planned. Rather, they took shape as the result of common agreement with respect to the most practical ways to site and build for known purposes in specific places. As towns grew, their layout reflected needs and technologies. As critically important as protection was, it was the access to work, particularly to different kinds of apprenticeship, learning a craft or refining a skill, as well as inclusion in religious, fraternal, and social organizations that made towns appealing. Job opportunities, shared knowledge, kinship, camaraderie. Their inhabitants developed over time a sense of belonging and attachment to something larger and stronger than they themselves, in which they could find identity, an answer to the age-old question, where do you come from? Towns and smaller cities instilled a communal pride of place, missing in the country, which manifested itself in all manner of ways, from emblematic heraldry, flags and coats of arms, to distinctive uniforms and titles for local officials. Towns bestowed their highest honors upon and erected monuments to those who defended them in war and competed for them in peace in all manner of athletics contests, from jousting to football to the Olympics. As regional and national cultures evolved, various towns became famous for their distinctive food as well as the quality of their institutional buildings and public open spaces. Others were known for their special products and crafts, for their arts and entertainments. This process of qualitative differentiation meant that towns in different places had a look and a feel which distinguished them. They developed not only distinctive local accents and modes of dress, but their buildings reflected the nature of their region, its landscape, and the local building traditions and materials. At their very best, sophisticated towns encouraged innovation and creativity and promoted civic and social values in their citizens. Athenians, as you may know, took an oath of citizenship that they would strive to leave Athens a better place than they found it. Primarily, it was the promise of opportunity and personal advancement within an order but flexible public realm in which outcomes and surroundings were more or less predictable that allowed towns to survive and evolve so well, a living example of Darwinian urbanism. In towns large and small, different kinds of people were forced to learn to live together, to mediate differences and exchange ideas, to tolerate one another, and by doing so to prosper. Because of this, towns became the communal cradle, the incubator in which lasting regional cultures flourished. Now, why am I reading this to you? People forget that smaller towns and smaller cities were where Western and Eastern culture was born. And we systematically set out, without intending to, at the end of the Second War, to destroy them. We didn't mean to, but we did. And we've lost a huge piece of our culture, which now we have a chance to regain. Let's now talk about some of the things that are necessary to deal with town planning and design and the process of getting at it. And I want to look at this from 2 points of view, one from the public sector's point of view and one from a professional point of view. The public sector, some of you have heard me talk about Joe Riley, who's the mayor of Charleston, been the mayor for 28 years, arguably the most knowledgeable public official with respect to town design and town maintenance, and certainly one of the great mayors, best politician I've ever known. Joe Riley has spent his life in political office making his town better than when he found it. And this goes from planning to the design to the details of everything done in that town. And Charleston could not have survived what it was headed for without Joe. He literally stopped what would have happened in Charleston and turned the boat around and took it in a different direction. Joe and I put together something called the Mayor's Institute on City Design. I'm not going to go into it now. I bored some people at lunch about it. But at that institute, where we invited mayors, it continues now, from different cities, big and small, we would present, each of us who were urbanists would present ideas about what was important for a city to have if they were going to get on with the difficult issue of planning and designing their towns. And since this was a conference of mayors, and since Joe was a mayor and I had worked for a mayor for 8 years, we both believed that the mayor in the end was the major designer of his or her town, whether they knew it or not, and they were responsible for it, for everything that happened on their watch. Ed Logue, who was among the most experienced urban development people in the United States, always said, what do you need first? Maps. The map is not the territory, but the map is an essential tool in city planning. It was a tool in discovery. It's still a tool in discovery. It is an absolute essential feature. You must have good maps. Actually, they're easy to come by now. I got some off the internet before I came down here the other night. But not only must you have the maps, this is the city now, you must know what they tell you. Reading maps is not just looking at plats and numbers on them. Maps tell almost everything at one level of scan. And so maps are what it's about, and you must have good maps, and they must be up to date, and the people who actually run the planning operation have to know how to use them. And they have to make them available, and they have to be understandable. Second, mayors. I won't elaborate it. You must have a strong mayor system if you're going to have sensible and rational planning and development over a period of years for any town. Someone has to be around who is responsible politically for outcomes. You're not going to get this with city managers. They're not responsible. They just can't do it. And there's been almost no American city that has had real progress in planning and development that's done with a city manager system. There are exceptions, but almost none. So you need a strong mayor system. I know this is not something that you can wish for and get, but down the line, it's a hell of a lot better to have it if you really want to get something done. Institutional and business support systems. The leaders in a community have to come together. They may have real differences, but they must coalesce and come together to prioritize things that have to happen. And you must spend a lot of time and effort on that. It's enormously important. Again, every city that's been able to deal with real problems has done this. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy going. City building and development and planning is a long-term adult project, and you're trying to think out 15 or 20 or 30 years. And you have to be willing to make decisions now that are only going to have payout in 5 years. If you keep changing politics and everyone undoes the thing that the person before him, you get nothing. It's just not going to happen that way. So the institutional and business structure has a longer memory and is likely not to turn over as fast. Energetic staff. You must have people working in the city who you can count on and who are really excited about what they do and are knowledgeable. Educational institutions are fundamental. You need to draw on your educational institutions for support. You have very good universities in this region, in the Southeast. Some of them have good planning and architectural schools. You need to draw on those. Joe Riley has set up a civic design center to help the city carry out the planning studies that their own planning staff can't do. It's a wonderful model for smaller cities and towns. You must hire competent professionals, like doctors and lawyers who often lose patients to jail or the graveyard. Planners and architects make horrible mistakes. So they're as fallible as anyone, but some are better than others. And if you want to get a good product, you try to hire them. You must figure out how to present, how to articulate and present information about planning issues to the public. There are two ways, or two aspects of that. If you're lucky, your town newspaper may have someone who is a critic who writes once a month or once every 2 weeks or whenever it's necessary about these issues. 20 years ago, there were almost no newspapers that had that. Now, there are extremely good people in communities all over the United States who write about urban planning and development issues. Some of them are wacko people, but some of them are quite good. At least you get the issue out, and it's not thought to be, less important than sort of, road races or whatever it is. This is not a culture that's very interested in architecture or urban planning, but everyone is very interested in negative results, i.e. they don't like it. So these things you must expect of your press, and you must expect that these groups, both public sector groups and institutional and business groups, will make an effort to present information about these issues. There are a lot of ways to do that. And in fact, it's very important. If you've been in government, and I've spent a lot of time there, we're going through a whole series of hearings now in New York on all the goodies that are happening. And those presentations are as important as the work that's been done. And they have to be carefully thought out. Now, let me turn to pictures which are better than words. I'm told I can walk around. That's good. These are two of my favorite pictures. This is Savannah. This is this engraving of Oglethorpe's first settlement on the Savannah River, where you cut out from the heart of the continent a flat piece of land and you put down this pattern of squares called wards. This is one of the most brilliant urban plans in history. And it has been a touchstone for many years for professionals all over the world. And indeed, it's provided in downtown Savannah one of the great small city experiences in the world, not just in the United States. This ground zero having won the war in Europe, as I said, we lost the peace at home. This is Houston. This is what we did to the middle of our cities. This is the Nagasaki syndrome. The entire neighborhood was bulldozed and filled up because people wanted to build 35, 40-story buildings. It sucked up all the demand, and dirty bookstores and the odd taxpayer and parking lots remained. This was truly a frightening result for the richest empire in the world, and it came close to killing most American cities. The most damaging thing that's not in this picture is rich and middle-class people moved out of town. And there's one very simple law of history. You cannot have a decent town, city, or village unless rich and poor live in it, period. And if you don't have that, you won't have a decent town, city, or village. And you have to make living in town the central public policy priority of townscape. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, which looked like this. They built this wonderful Monument Avenue at the end of the last century to a lost cause, but it was in fact an incredible piece of urbanism. And this is a segment of Washington. The towns that we built and had been building since 1607 were really very nice in 1939, and they looked like that and like this. And they made a lot of sense, and there was a lot of housing downtown in these towns. And there were big trees and streets that you could park in and neighborhoods you could walk in. And by the 1970s, this is what the headlines were about. This is my beloved Tyson's Corner that used to be the most wonderful area. Growth gets mixed signals here. Silver Spring Plan, still face growing play. Look at this world that we created. This is it, all over the United States. It was all designed around one notion, how to move a lot of traffic. Every other city planning concern disappeared. This is the plan. Talk about aberrant spider webs. This is the plan of Tyson's Corner. This massively expensive infrastructure, superhighways, huge buildings put down in this extraordinary, no one in their right mind, unless they were alcoholic, would be designing lots that look like this. You could in fact work here, but not be able to go to lunch here where the restaurant was without getting into your car and getting out onto the interstate system and driving over here. The most preposterous drawing about how to build in the history of the world is this goddamn thing. And look what it produced downtown. A world, truly frightening world. Remember the movie Blade Runner? This, at grade, either desperately poor people being pushed back. This is a bulldozer, and it's just going to push all this stuff away. The detritus of the old cities. And this charming world of Streetside, and these towers with Darth Vader in them, no ways of getting in. And look at the sidewalk. This one lonely, lost drug addict. Only SkyPager can reach you here. This is a kind of advertising world's mythical future that they believed all of us aspire to. You jam every iconic and symbolic building of the culture into this thing. And in fact, there will be people, developers, who will want to do this. Actually, just like this. And yet, you don't see a single person. You can't imagine how you would move through any. This is not just a joke. This is all stuff we've done. In the center of downtown Tampa, this is one block from the top corner, we have created a landscape of detritus, residual parking lots, dying trees, rooftop equipment, This is where high-density stuff ought to be. And signs which promise a world veranda, beautiful. There are no flowers, there are no verandas, and if you go to this address, it takes you an hour to get there. And this rotates slowly in the middle of downtown. This is, Ridley Scott, who made Blade Runner, there's nothing more terrifying or Dada than this thing. That is it. At the mayor's conference, we would always ask mayors to bring a postcard of their city to the conference. If you can't buy a good postcard of your city, you're in trouble. In old days, and I collected postcards from all the cities that we were interested in. This was a postcard from the 1940s about Raleigh. There's a very beautiful state capital designed by one of the best American architects. And it sits in one of the 5 square, tree-lined squares that were originally laid out, 3 of which have been covered now with hideous development. This is from the 1980s. This is a postcard from Raleigh. And this is, in fact, illicit romance, a swimming pool, this dreadful underground place where people go for conferences, always in the basement of a really horrible hotel. And this stuff, the Villa Capri, not close to Capri. It is very funny, but it's ours. Williamsburg. This is very important. Williamsburg, one of the most beautiful and important town plans in the history of the country, one of the first. It's a single Main Street town. It has an educational institution, the College of William and Mary at one end. It has an institute of what was then international government, the House of Burgesses, longest seating parliament in Anglo-Western culture here. It has at the crossroads a powder horn, a local state, at that time, county market, a church. It has the street of important houses in which the biggest house, the governor, Crown Governor, lived, with gardens which were public gardens. It has shops, offices, houses, restaurants, and inns all along this main street, and they have a uniform frontage and very different back. And it has a big piece of the continent, a big piece of nature that runs up. It's built on the highest piece of ground between the York and the Potomac rivers, and it is one of the most brilliant and simple town plans in the world. And when I was growing up, it was being rediscovered and rebuilt by the Rockefellers, and you can see here the glory. I saw things today when Ken and I were driving around that's like that here, in which you have small houses with their own backyards, with big trees, wonderful scale, privacy areas, and then a big piece of the natural world in this huge swale sweeping through, coming right through. So this interstitching of the natural world, the United States was all about the continent, and the built world and the natural world always have to come together in cities. And those cities that you love are those places where that happens. You can have formal squares, big trees. You've got fabulous squares here and wonderful trees. Those things can be formal, or they can be residual pieces of the natural world. We built incredibly beautiful villages. I went away from Virginia, and I lived in the Orient for a while, and then came back and went to New England. This is East Hampton, where I live, which is right there. At the center of town is the village green, the graveyard, one of the big pieces of infrastructure, a windmill, a church, a meeting house, a school, what is now a place for a newspaper, everything, all the apparatus of the culture around this central communal green. In Nantucket, which was a big commercial whaling port, as you know, is the most beautiful, small, working seaside town. It's got a working waterfront, but people live in quite nice houses right next to it. Very important. Live close to where the action is. If you want to have an interesting waterfront, for God's sake, don't put an empty park there. It's a preposterous notion. Take the city out, as in Charleston, put shops, offices, restaurants, inns, hotels on the waterfront, have a lineal park, actually enjoy it. It's self-policing. Get with it. That was an idea that was dead 15 years ago, that scheme. I pulled it up on the internet. I looked at the picture. I thought, holy God, dead on arrival. Now, look at Savannah. Here's a growth model, 1733, 1856. Once you get it right, keep copying it. Each square, each one of these wards has a square in the middle of it, houses around it. There are 4 truss lots. That is for public buildings, churches, museums. In each one is a self-sufficient part of the city. The circulation is brilliant. Through traffic goes this way. Traffic to the local address goes this way, is slowed down. And you can keep making this carpet of squares forever. When they stopped just before the Civil War and started again after the war, Savannah you can blow out at the end of a gun. It's like every other dumbass place. But this is the real stuff. And this is a brilliant piece of urban thinking. In Savannah, this is Factor's Walk. It's on the edge of the river. It's the first megastructure. On this side, stuff comes in from ships. This is why you get down close to where things are happening. Goods and services are coming in from ships. They go in to the basement of this building. They're pushed up. This was where the markets exchanges were. These were offices, and they're now residences above that, all in this one building. Very simple, beautiful brick building sitting right on the river. And just nearby, a lineal park, very simple, no crazy slides, no stupid changes of material, no ups and downs, tank traps, sidewalks, ground cover, decent lighting fixtures, big trees, go home. You can't beat this. This is 3,000 years of thinking about things. This is, when you get that right, stay with it. Charleston, another jewel. Institutional buildings prominently located, some of them coming out into the streets. A theater, a church, a meeting house, residences, cars on the street, good trees. Everything works perfectly, as modern today as any place in the world, and as desirable as any place in this country. This is what you try to do, and you learn from. Brilliant house types. Again, the rules of place, geography, which is climate, location, building materials, flora, fauna. Yeah, that's first. Second is how have people built over time? Because people who've lived there over time have figured out how to build there. Where the sun comes from, where it rains, when you need things over your eye, how to lay out plans in which wind blows through. So you have to look at the building culture of a place. You have to understand the institutional infrastructure. There's technical infrastructure, there's political, economic, social. In the end, it's the cultural infrastructure that's most important in cities. And that's what gives you real history and sustaining mythology. These are the ingredients that, in fact, allow you to do this stuff. Now, money helped, okay? Charleston was able to build this stuff. This could have been horrible, too. They are able to build it because it was a very rich port. Sag Harbor in Long Island was whaling in Nantucket. It was money. But they built their money, they spent their money very well. These people copied stuff that they liked, and they'd come from Barbados. They amended it to suit the climate, and they invented a regional architecture, which is unique. And they understood the difference between public and private. You can walk on a public street in Charleston, look through a window into someone's private garden. These people are protected, but the civilization of this private world is pulled out into the street. This is not complex stuff. It's so straightforward. And the scale of the streets and the way in which small streets are narrower, they can have rough materials, they've got buildings that hold the street front, they get higher scale stuff on the waterfront. This is all dumb ABCs of town making. And it's not hard stuff. And it was almost impossible for us to remember it. Ken and I were joking. Always look for monuments, generally monuments to soldiers, fountains, cannons, big trees. I'm serious. These are signs of great cities. Those of you who know Baltimore, this is one of the great urban spaces in the United States, Mount Vernon Square. It's fabulous. This is the beginning of Commonwealth Avenue in Boston. This monument, there's a fountain behind it. There's a great street. There are terrific trees, and there's some cannons. St. Louis has this incredible residential area in which the through streets go by and you turn into gates, and each long precinct has an island in the middle of it, and they have these fountains, and they've got wonderful houses, and you park on the streets. This is such a straightforward idea that as soon as you see it, yep, so that's how you make, in the middle of the city, you make a special precinct. Richmond, Virginia, my town, has a block type that is absolutely superb. These are alleys, and these are houses. They're single family. Some of them are semi-connected. I mean, some of them open, some of them are connected. They all have their own backyards, and then across from them, that's where garages, used to be stables, but this is a double width. There are gardens in here. On the side streets were the commercial frontages that had shops in them. So this is a fabulous invention. And it's what you look at. This is what I mean by town building pattern. All the things that have to happen, from servicing, where do you take out the garbage, where should the shops be, where do you get protected gardens, where do you get protected street front, they're all in this diagram. It's all been figured out. If you travel a lot, and I spent a lot of time traveling and working abroad, you begin to see other cultures using streets. And this is not just a travel photograph. This happens every day in streets. Even in Iran, you would go, the flower shops in Iran on the streets were fabulous. And flowers are incredibly exciting. We've almost, as if we've forgotten. You see all this stuff in catalogs and on Martha Stewart on the TV, but you never see it in the streets, which is where it should be. All the flowers should be in the streets. Putting in mass transit. This is a street in Poland. This is one of the most sophisticated streets I know. It has a transit system in it. It has a wide sidewalk. Deliveries only occur at off hours, and they occur here. And when the delivery time is gone, this returns to the street. The rails are countersunk in the ground so you don't trip up going over them. This is not rocket science. It's just sound design. And courtyards and tight frontages next to big trees. You've got Spain on one side and Eaton Square on the other. These are time-tested. The heights of those buildings are wonderful. And you'll find in Scandinavia, here's Stockholm, Americans forgot that the surface of the city is what you come in contact with. You know, as Ken and I was saying, the ubiquitous place in American cities now is parking lots. But we don't design parking lots very well. We should be designing them very well. Raleigh has beautiful parking lots with planting and walls around them. So when you park there, you got to say, this is pretty nice. The ground surface in European cities is fabulous. They're works of art. They also take off rainwater. They deal with almost everything, and they'll last forever. And to be on this surface of this street in Stockholm is worth the trip to Europe. The sensitivity of a park, this is again in Sweden, where they put on puppet shows and they have they put benches, and then there are flowers. These are roses that can come out between each bench. It's a simple idea, doesn't cost a lot of money, but once you see it, your eyes change forever. And the idea that people care enough about their place to do that in. New York. I want to go through some things. I'm going to race through these. I'm going to speed this up so that we get through this in the next 10 minutes. I'm sorry it's going on for so long. New York really invented in the United States. It invented itself as a commercial city, which it always was from Dutch times. But at the end of the 19th century, from 1870 to 1939, it built the most spectacular infrastructure in the history of American urbanism. Aqueducts from a huge Croton Reservoir system, underground water tunnels, a subway system, fabulous bridges, not just the Brooklyn Bridge, but a whole series of fabulous, the first subway system, and the most beautiful park system, and then parkways. Transportation is always where the action is. Within 10 years of one another, New York built two of the most brilliant station complexes in the world. Penn Station, which was torn down. One of the reasons I went to work for the city, I got so pissed off. Excuse me. I got so annoyed with that happening. Grand Central was this in 1900. Now this is city planning and institutional, in this case, corporation, railroad corporation, and development savvy. They said, gee, we've got all these trains here, why don't we build a station? And after we build the station, which is on 4 levels, let's cover the tracks. All of Park Avenue is an air rights development. The tracks run up Park Avenue all the way to 125th Street. At 96th Street, they come out of the ground. All of this is built above grade. These are lots that had been prepared, and we think this is solid ground. This is all sitting up in the air. So this is an incredible piece of infrastructure which in fact transformed the city of New York. It's important to see this photograph because that thinking is what it is about, and it's what made New York work. We've been drawing down on that bank account, that investment in infrastructure since. We did nothing since the end of the Second War. In the middle of the 19th century, this extraordinary park was laid out. And as you know, there was nothing here. There was sheep grazing here, and there were no, this created huge real estate value, and it literally became not only the real lung, but the symbolic lung for Manhattan Island. The greatest planning decision in the United States in the 20th century, in the 19th century, was this. And it spawned this notion among New Yorkers that though it's all about business, let's try to have some parks. One of the most brilliant was after the war, this Paley Park, which is an abandoned building lot. Very simple materials. Always keep the materials simple. Don't have too many of them. Small paving blocks, very small honey locust trees, a waterfall at the back to create white noise to block out the sound of the cars, and you can get a cup of coffee. And they've got some chairs. You can't beat this. All the best inventions in cities are quite simple. This is an invention. The Best Pocket Park here was an invention. The Persians knew about it long ago, but we didn't. The rooftops at Rockefeller Center are a work of art. Very few people see them, but these are on top of the low buildings. This is, all of a sudden you see, aha, the horizontal surface is important. One, you look down on it, but two, when you use these gardens, they're a pleasure to be in. And just below it, there's a sunken garden, which, as you know, is a skating rink, and people eat there in their restaurants. This was the best kind of urban design thinking. How do you design in a high-density center? It's different, but it's the same kind of thinking you use in a small town. On the East River Drive, Mr. Moses built a double-deck highway. In the air rights above it, one of the most beautiful strip parks, and a street of the most wonderful houses built over this thing. This, again, double use of valuable space. All of these lessons, and in New York, as in Charleston, this is Rainbow Row in Charleston. This is East 70th Street in New York. The highest real estate value still, not in apartment houses, in single-family houses, most of which have now been broken up into flats, built on streets with big trees. Really dumb notion. Easy to achieve, timeless. I'm going to go through this. This is Battery Park City. I want to show it to you in two phases. This is when the World Trade Center was being built. There was this big landfill. The abandoned piers here. A landfill operation was built here when the towers were completed. It then sat. There was this idiotic plan, megastructure designed for it on thousands of levels, with a nightmare. These are the same people who gave us Highway World. And this thing sat looking like Saudi Arabia for about 10 years. In 1978, the State Development Corporation got hold of it, and my partner, Alex Cooper, prepared what? Not a megastructure. They took the street and block plan from out here, brought the streets across, built small blocks on which individual developers could build, put an esplanade all the way down. The center of it became the World Financial Center. This is ground zero right there. And here's what public sector did. They built the public realm, the streets, the blocks, the parks. These were left to be developed in time. All of this is done now. This is what thinking about public sector development is. And it's because it's in New York. You can do this anywhere. It was done all over the United States in smaller towns, this idea. And you have to keep showing it to yourself because you forget. And 20 years later, we designed this esplanade. This is why I'm saying the strip park along the water, where you take the uses of your town, whatever they are, commercial, residential, retail, cultural, you push them out to the edge. Everyone loves the water. And then you do a public park system, which can be a narrow esplanade like this or a wide park like this. It varies. And this is also very New York. It's a thing that as soon as people say, they said, yep, this is New York. You can do the same thing here. I'm not going to talk about this. This is, we don't have time. We've spent a lot of time. We were retained by the World Financial Center a week after 9/11 to start work on Laurel Manhattan, and we did studies of it's essentially about rebuilding infrastructure. All the stuff that is being used now as a base is this plan that we developed for where the site should be, what the connection should be, etc. I want to talk quickly about, let's skip through celebration too, because I'll go for 5 more minutes. Celebration looked like this when we started. It's essentially a series of lakes and cypress heads and a lot of wetlands. It was an archipelago, really, of land. And by law as well as by choice, all of the brown stuff, which is really green, this is like an ocean. The only places you could build are in here. So this is like really building on the edge of the ocean on an archipelago. There's a giant interstate running from Orlando down to Tampa here, and a connector road to the airport here. So the idea is, how do you build a new town in that little cusp of land that's left and try to make it work with the natural systems? And you couldn't build on any of this stuff. But there were natural coursing, water coursing systems, and we said very simply, we will use the open space system, in this case a golf course, to wrap as a kind of buffer against Highway World. We will use the natural cypress heads and tree lines to create, this is where a school was going to be located. We will run a simple main street through the town connecting the entrance system to the lower part of the archipelago down here and ultimately out to there. And in the middle, we will, having channeled some of this water, we will put it into a lake. We will build something called Water Street, which drops about 10 feet from there to there as the street of larger houses, multifamily stuff. And in this sort of butterfly-shaped parcel left over, we will build residential precincts, each with their own small public park system. And you can see this is the residual land. This is the golf course in the buffer. This is a piece of the wetlands which we use. Around the center of town is a school, a bank, a courthouse, town hall, a post office, the major inn in town, a cinema, the commercial buildings here, all the parking in the center of the block, and then multifamily housing going up the streets that has ground floor retail in it, going up Water Street, a golf course at this end, and then varied income housing, bigger houses on the golf course, but not in the golf course, a road that you look over, and smaller houses in these tighter blocks here, a chapel, a health facility over on the island next to the wetlands. The great thing about Celebration is that when you look south, it'll be like looking over the ocean. Nothing will ever be built here, so you'll never see any of the other horrible stuff that you see in Florida. And this photograph I show because it's in construction, and it shows the strategy. You put the cinema, the multi-story, multi-family stuff with retail around the lake. The inn is now over here. So you should be able to walk easily around here. You can bike. Water Street, which comes down from the golf course, is where the multifamily housing is now. It's all in place. A sports facility on this island. You have outdoor concerts here. And the parking, this is a multi-story office building. That's an office building. That's the post office. All the parking is hidden in these pockets. That is, you can make new towns that accommodate parking at the scale of the places that we've liked so much. We went to nearly every really good small American town when we were working on Celebration to see what we liked. And what people like are things like the stuff you've got. You've got one. And it's authentic. It's here. Disney doesn't have to come. But these two things, single-family housing and multifamily housing over commercial stuff, that was the program. There were golf club buildings. There were town squares. I mean, there were squares like the ones that we'd seen elsewhere. And the public realm at Celebration, Dwani said, it's the only place I can get a Cuban cigar, an international newspaper, go to a good restaurant, get fresh bread in the morning and go to the cinema in the evening and come back and have a drink at the bar and walk home. And you can do it on a very simple 2.5, 3-story street. And the park system in and around the town, more people on bikes, more people walking. This is, if you have to live in Orlando, this is the place to live. And everyone says, well, it's a company town. It's a BS. If you go there, it's far and away the best place to be. Seaside, as you know, which is a very famous resort, inspired by Leo Creel, planned by Andres Dwani and Liz Plater-Zyberg, is here. It's 80 acres. We have planned watercolor which wraps around Seaside on Western Lake, and it has, this is the first phase, the second phase is here, the third phase is here, and it goes out to this interstate. All of this will be watercolor when it's finished. We consider that Seaside is the historic district of watercolor, and indeed we attempted to do different things. Watercolor, I mean, Seaside had been done by friends of ours. We knew it intimately, and ironically, we said we want to connect in. I talked with Andres when we started to the street system, which is what New Urbanist Principle is supposed to be about. Seasiders don't want us to connect in. This was designed so people who live in Seaside can go out and launch a boat as well as use all of these pathways. It will happen. We've built our roads right up to here, and those barriers will come down. But essentially, it's a very simple resort road that runs along this lake. This is a place where two ecologies that exist nowhere else in the world except in South Africa. That is an ocean and what are called dune lakes come together. And they're incredibly beautiful. If Audubon had come here, this is where he would have been painting, or Sargent, or Homer. It's a place, that's how we got to watercolor. We said this is a place that great American watercolorists would have come to paint the giant lilies and the crocodiles and the deer and the egrets and the eagles. It has a intersection with Route 30. All the beach stuff is over here. This is a town center with multifamily housing over shops. This is a village green. Here, that axis goes across the water up to the highest piece of land, which is here, where there will be a church. It will be a multi-denominational church. It will be a meeting hall. And you will be able to see from this high piece of ground, 35 feet, like a mountain down there, all the way across this body of water and across to the ocean. So this was to create a much more lush park system. You can't build close to the water, so this edge condition at watercolor is going to be terrific. The buildings are slightly bigger, the multi-story buildings, than at Seaside. The houses are smaller. This is the town green. It's coming into its own now. Those of you who have been there. It has a very beautiful flower garden that runs down one side of it, and it has very nice three-story buildings. These are apartments, and these are shops, and they ring that central green. It has a bath club on the beach, which is here. It has a great sports club. These are houses, again, over retail. This happens to be a fitness club right now here. And at the other end, on the lake, it has a very different kind of club where you get your kayak, a canoe, and you can eat there. So you can walk from the ocean to the lake in 5 minutes at the end of the day. And that was the purpose, to make it a incredibly attractive walking environment. And they're everything from three-story apartments to one-story bungalows there for sale. Now, very quickly, Charleston. This is a big public building, and I wanted to show this because you have to, in small old towns, from time to time, build big stuff. And big stuff is very destructive. It's destructive in scale. It puts undue stress on existing urbanism. I was cursed in that I love Charleston. I've done a lot of work there. And we won a competition to design the new county courthouse. Sits on the four corners of law. The county couldn't have given a damn about being there. They wanted to be out in highway world, one of those pictures that I showed you earlier on, like Tyson's Corner, where they could get close to the good stuff. And the mayor forced them, said, you can't leave. Historically, the county has always had a seat here. You got to stay. And so they reluctantly did. They had a competition. Courts are big things. Those of you know them. They have court sets, and they have, you have to keep the criminals separated from the lawyers, and the lawyers separated from the clients. So the public, it's a huge security problem. The site was, they bought a site, and they cleared out only about that much. We said it's not even close to being enough. You got to clear out all this stuff. But that house is a great house. We're going to pick that house up and move it over to here, fill in this gap tooth, and you're going to restore this, and moreover, you're going to restore the historic courthouse here. So this is the four corners of law. Here's the church. Here's the mayor's office, the court of God, the court of Joe Riley. It's almost as powerful as God. The county courthouse and the federal courthouse. And that's a courthouse, judicial courthouse building right now that belongs to this. So this whole square is being, some of you remember Charleston. This is a very beautiful park here. The hotel is right here that some of you have probably stayed in, and this is a very beautiful hall right there. There's a huge parking lot. So we said, okay, we will restore all of these buildings. This is going to be a 4-story building. It's a real killer. If we put it back behind this screen of lower buildings, you'll never see it except here, and that will be its entrance, and you will in fact come in and go into an arcade system that takes you into the public part of the courthouse, which is here. There'll be a Charleston scale garden and one arm of the courthouse, like the paw of the lion. Remember, lions are always on courthouse. Well, this is lion got it one paw, where there's a restaurant and a meeting room will come out to the street and engage the street, and indeed have an arcade over the street, so that, and it'd be of a different scale. This was the design problem. Unfortunately, well, fortunately, we got it done. It's done, but the builder wasn't great, and the county was not a very good client. This is the wood model. This shows you from the air how big this building is. It's huge. The hotel is only slightly bigger, but there it is. From the ground, you don't see it. So here's the arcade system. This is the old building that's been done over. The old courthouse has been beautifully restored, and this is in the process of now being turned into a really beautiful brick and cobble precinct. This will be a beautiful garden, and this arcade that gets narrower and narrower as it goes down comes back to the street. This is all where the public goes in and uses the court. And as you go up in the building, all the public galleries, corridors, look out from this building onto Charleston. So you look out through big windows. You can see the scale. This is the old courthouse. These are the townhouses that have all been being worked on right now. This is the greenhouse that we moved and plugged in this opening. This is the lion's paw of the courthouse here, and this is a shop, and these are Charleston residential stuff right here. That's the old building in the back. When you pull that away, you can see this scale is much bigger. So it's this line of stuff screening this. We spent a lot of time on the scale of the building and how to break it down so that it didn't have this huge scale that these buildings have, and how to make these very big windows that gave you wonderful views out to the city. It's just been completed. You can see here's the street, here's an arcade over the street, here's the courthouse paw coming out with its arcade. This is looking back into the garden system. It uses South Carolina brick, and it has extraordinarily nice views onto Broad Street, and when you walk under its arcade, you're hardly aware that it's there. This is what building in a fragile, small-scale, historic precinct is about. How you can take your program and scale it down. This could also have been stylistically a modernist building, and you could have done that. In Charleston, that was not going to happen. And promises made and promises kept. I think in time, as this building settles in, it's going to be an addition rather than a subtraction to the city. Now, Ken showed me something today that gave me great excitement, which is a precinct, an expansion of this building in this precinct. And he asked me to look at it, which I did. And it's a terrific plan. I've got 2 pictures of it. This is in the context, here we are here. This is this very beautiful burial ground. Burial grounds have really good luck. Remember, I lived next to one in East Hampton. Savannah has the most beautiful burial grounds in the middle of the city. This is a beauty. And so here's the burial ground. Here's the existing building. This old street, which didn't exist, is being put in. Fabulous. You want streets. Cities are about streets and small blocks, not super blocks. It's exactly the opposite of what they taught you in planning school. You want small blocks. And you want scaled buildings. You want a lot of access. A very beautiful, simple series of dual courtyards with a meeting room building at the center where something like this could occur. another courtyard here, the parking controlled underneath, and a new street introduced here. And this, in fact, is going to make an exceptionally handsome neighbor to the rest of the, it's well scaled. And I told Ken, I said, listen, I told him it was very good. If I hadn't thought so, I would have told him it wasn't. It's a very, very sensitive piece of urban work. And this is a larger scale view. This is a larger scale. You can begin to see the scale of these buildings is going to be very much in keeping with the scale here. All the principles that we talked about. How you make very simple shapes and you create space inside that is private and you hold frontages of other streets. So this is how you take a building like this and you add to it, and in 15 years this will be an incredibly handsome precinct. And the story is told here. And this will be part of Pensacola, and it looks like it belongs here. And it's really good to see it. I want to thank you. I'm sorry that I've taken so much of your evening. It was a incredibly exciting day for me to be here. You've got a fabulous town, and you must guard it with enormous energy. Don't let them, it's you, don't let anyone try to take away or weaken what you've got here. And use your land intelligently. Think about how people like to live in cities. The only thing you do is just go to places that everyone goes to and likes, and do the walk around test. If you don't want to get out of your car and walk around, it's a horrible idea. Okay, thanks very much.